Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this week on our episode of Weathering the Market by Minuteman Weather. I'm meteorologist Dion DeLeo.
And I'm meteorologist Kailey Carey. And what are we going to be talking about today, Dion?
I'm pretty sure lots of you have noticed it's hot in a lot of crazy places where it shouldn't be hot right now.
That's right. Well, I guess it could be hot there.
But abnormally hot.
Yes.
I guess that's the key there. Abnormally hot in a lot of places where it shouldn't be.
And the main spot we're talking about, as you're probably aware, is the Pacific Northwest. So basically what's happening is it's an odd heat ridge. Like, this is an anomaly. This is not a normal thing that we see all the time. This heat ridge is basically positioned in a place that, the heat's going all the way to the coast, which is not normal because typically we have those Pacific cooler waters bringing in the cooler air. But basically, this easterly flow from the heat ridge that's a little bit further inland, so easterly flow meaning that warm air is flowing towards the Pacific Ocean from the Intermountain West, is basically forced to descend down the mountains. And when it does, it's compressing and the warm air is getting warmer. In this case, we've been seeing record-breaking heat.
That's right. There's been numerous days where the temperatures have broke up hundreds to 110 degrees easily in areas where it's not very common. And mind you, if you are from the Pacific Northwest or you've been to the Pacific Northwest, it's not, air conditioners aren't very common up there. They don't typically have those kinds of things. They don't usually need them. So as this compression happens, it's just enhancing the overall heat that is impacting the regions.
Yes, and in some areas, Canada hit its all-time high record, and I know I'm going to say this wrong. It was in Lytton, I believe, British Columbia, of 126 degrees. Yikes.
That sounds like something you easily pick out of the desert Southwest. That's like, that's another day in Arizona.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. Maybe that's a little extreme, but still, even still, that's something you would expect, across the southwestern U.S., not in parts of British Columbia.
I know, odd. So, with all that being said, we're watching this heat ridge closely because as silking approaches rapidly for corn, if we see these kind of temperatures in the Midwest, that could be detrimental.
Very.
Yes.
Very detrimental, especially for regions that have already been experiencing dryness in more of a moderate sense of, I guess, of the term, relatively speaking. Not nearly as bad as the West, but we have been watching dry areas across portions of the Dakotas, southern Minnesota, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, pretty much the western Corn Belt, kind of like the Central Plains. Like, those areas they've been dry already, and they haven't even really had to experience the full-on wrath of this heat ridge yet. So any kind of movement eastward could be, catastrophic, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that's a very strong word.
It's a very strong word. Fair enough. It is. But, still, I guess I'm just trying to drive the point home. I mean, it's a very serious issue, and it could be a very, very serious issue for the markets.
And I just want to go back real quick. I did my math wrong. Lytton, British Columbia, just 3 hours east of Vancouver, reached 46.6 degrees Celsius, which I calculate to be 129, but apparently it's 115.9 degrees Fahrenheit. So
still ridiculous.
That's on me. But yes, it's still way too hot.
Still way too hot for British Columbia.
So when looking at all of this, we have a lot of this heat out in the Northwest, and models are, forecasting this heat to move a little bit up into the Canadian prairies as we head a little bit further into the week. But then later on, we're looking at another system possibly pushing that heat back down into the central portion of the United States, being centered over North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. And keep in mind, this is all long range, so we're having to look at a lot here. And long range models during this time of year are starting to struggle, especially when that southwest monsoon starts to pick up. For some reason, once we start to see those rains pick up in the desert Southwest, the Euro especially has a hard time handling that 2-week outlook. So it's kind of hard as a forecaster to say where exactly the placement of these ridges are going to be, but we do have the potential because, as we all know, as we start to get into the middle of July, that Bermuda high tends to lift up a little bit further north, tends to expand, and with this current ridge that we're seeing up in the Pacific Northwest, they have the potential basically to create a super ridge. I wish we could put a sound effect in there.
A super ridge.
And once we see that, that's where the potential for stress on, across the Corn Belt could develop. Luckily, the eastern portion of the Corn Belt has seen a lot of rain. In some areas, too much rain. They're not able to dry out. But it looks like that we could possibly need that if these long-range outlooks do come to fruition. Don't you think?
Right, yeah. Drying out the eastern half of the Corn Belt would be a little bit more beneficial. Oh, definitely not on the scale that we've seen across western parts of the Corn Belt, but it's going to be really dependent on timing of when it gets there and how bad it's supposed to be and what phase the corn happens to be in.
Exactly. So silking, I think we were looking at the charts the other day. It looks like it's coming up within the next, 10 days on average-ish, which could be problematic, especially if you are in the western Corn Belt, because if that heat is centered over Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, that does spell trouble. So another parameter that I was looking at, trying to figure out what's going on, because these long-range models are having a hard time handling everything. And I don't know if you're following it this week, but the GFS was bringing in this closed low across the Northeast that the Euro wasn't even seeing. So everything is kind of everywhere. With that being said, I turned to the MJO. I was starting to look at, are we going to be in phase 1? Are we going to be in phase 2, phase 3? What are we dealing with? Currently, phase 2, which implies...
Well, it pretty much lines up with what we're seeing a lot of right now. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this heat across the Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies. So it makes perfect sense that we're at a phase 2 right now. But more importantly, I think it's a matter of the forecast and where are we going from here.
Exactly. So when I saw that the phase 2 was lining up with our current situation, and that's where we were, I was like, okay, looks like MJO could be a good indicator of what we're going to deal with. So, and sure enough, we are forecasted to be in a phase 3 by July 5th. And that does indicate that heat starting to move a little bit further down to the central portion of the country. So when you're kind of looking at everything lining up, I'm like, oh, wow, this has the potential to happen. So definitely something that we're going to be watching closely and hopefully have a better grip on as we get through this holiday weekend and where the ridge placements and everything start to line up.
We can only hope, yeah.
That's right. That's all we got for you today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will catch you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Weathering the Market. We love sharing all this information with you guys, and if you didn't already know, we work for a company called Minuteman Weather, which provides a full range of energy and agricultural weather services. If you would like to sign up for a free trial or request more information, check us out at minutemanweather.com. We'll be back next Wednesday. Thanks.